Hey everyone, I'm Jordy, and this is your boss guide for the 5th encounter in Sunwell Plateau, the infamous guild killer, Muru. Now this one, and Kill Jaden, will be a bit longer than the previous ones, because there's a lot of information I want to make sure you understand. I'm sorry about that. Okay, before we get into the guide, I just want to say one thing. If you've gotten up to this point, I have no doubt that you can kill Muru. But make no mistake, he is the hardest boss in this place, and you will wipe a lot learning the encounter. That's okay. As you learn, remember to be nice to each other. This game is getting harder, and that's a good thing. All the wipes mean that once you finally do get him down, the victory will mean that much more. Okay, on to the fight. Muru is a 2-phase encounter consisting of an ad control phase followed by an all-out DPS race in phase 2. Now, rather than do abilities first, then the walkthrough second, I'm going to go over each phase in its entirety because they are completely separate. First, let's discuss raid comp. As I said in the last boss guide, this is the same comp we recommended last time. This will work on every fight in this place. And like with Eridar Twins, 7 healing feels really great. And especially having the 3 tanks on this fight. I think you could probably 2 tank this eventually with some strategy adjustments, but we'll stick to 3 in this guide. Alright, phase 1. Muru himself only does a couple things. Let's cover those first. First, he does negative energy, which pulls us out of Muru every second, dealing about 1,000 unresistible shadow damage to 4 to 5 players. This is just damage you need to heal through. It's kind of similar to Felmist's aura, not a big deal. Second, darkness. This is cast every 45 seconds, and it creates a large void zone around Muru. Standing in the zone deals 3,000 shadow damage every second and prevents all healing done. 8 Dark Fiends will also spawn in this circle. These ads will explode upon player contact, dealing 5,000 raid-wide damage and leaving a 2,000 damage dot on the entire raid. Now these can be killed by dispels or purges, so we use a Shadow Priest who mass dispels for this. And then also summon Void Portal. Now, the rest of this phase, Muru will open a Void Portal every 30 seconds. This portal spawns a Void Sentinel that melees really hard and also does Shadow Pulse, which does a large amount of damage to anyone within melee range. He also does a Void Blast, which does about 9,500 damage and applies a debuff that lowers attack speed by 35%. Upon their death, they spawn 8 Void Spawns. These ads melee for between 7 and 900 damage each and only have about 25,000 HP. They will also Shadow Bolt Volley any targets near them, dealing 1,200 to 1,600 shadow damage. We recommend having your warlocks enslave these throughout the fight for the extra damage they can bring. These also should be otherwise AoE down very quickly. I'll go over in the walkthrough the best way to deal with these void spawns, but if you're a warlock, pay special attention to the macro section. That should help clean this up a ton. In addition to all of this, he spawns 2 sets of 3 humanoid ads, which will spawn from the entrance and the exit of the room about 15 seconds into the phase and every 60 seconds after that. They consist of 2 Shadow Sword Berserkers, which are basic melee ads that dual wield. They will periodically buff themselves with Flurry, which increases attack and move speed by 100% for 6 seconds. And they have about 135,000 HP each. Note that these are stunnable. They also spawn 1 Shadow Sword Fury Mage on each side. These are caster ads that will use Fell Fireball, which deals about 4,500 fire damage to their target if they get the cast off. The mages also melee for about 3,000 to 4,000 damage. They will periodically buff themselves with Spell Fury, which makes all their casts instant and increases magic damage done by 50% and makes them unable to move. This can be purged, dispelled, or spell stolen. They have about 115,000 HP each. Alright, that's everything in phase 1. Let's see how it plays out in practice. Phase 1 is all about ad control and having a clean transition into phase 2. The goal is to reduce Muru's health to 0, which will then spawn Entropius. On the pole, you want to blast Muru with as much damage as you can. A good metric to shoot for here is between 50 and 60% before the first darkness spawns. Only use any bloodlusts here that you won't be able to use in phase 2, like swapping in a lust from the healer group into a DPS group. 15 seconds into the encounter, the humanoid ads will start to spawn. The The tanks should establish aggro on the melee adds first, then pick up the casters and bring them together under Muru if there is no void zone around him currently, or onto the range stack. Tanks will need to communicate when threat is good enough for the raid to begin AoE damage and cleaving. Healers should watch their threat as the adds spawn. Try to throttle your output until the tanks establish threat, and then keep pumping. Void Sentinels should be picked up and tanked outside of the raid group so they are in range of your range DPS. These spawns are random along the outside wall of the room, so a misdirect can be really helpful on spawns that are far from where you're currently tanking. Once they die, their priority should be warlocks enslaving the void spawns, and then AoE killing off the remaining. Alright, real quick, let's discuss these little void walkers. Each warlock should pick one and enslave it. These macros will help you mark which void walker you're picking, so you don't pick the same one as another warlock. Just make sure you communicate which number you're picking. Each number correlates with a different mark. They also have a Shadow Bolt Volley that does a lot of damage, so you should use these macros in your spells to help make sure that it's cast consistently and right when it's off cooldown. Shout out to Crix for sending me these. I'll also link these in the description below if you missed it. DPS priorities are very important in this phase so that you don't get overwhelmed. We used this priority list as a benchmark for our raid. First, for the melee DPS, you want to cleave an AoE on the humanoids after threat's been established by your tanks, and then, and only then, once those are dead, do you focus damage on Muru. For range DPS, you want to focus on the Void Sentinels and the Void Spawns, then any extra AoE on the humanoids, and then, and only then, do you focus on Muru. We opt to have the Shadow Priest continue damage on Muru for the majority of the phase to keep consistent mana return for his group, and also to keep his soul focused on Muru and the darkness so that he can be ready to mass dispel the Dark Fiends when they spawn. The goal is to push Muru to 0% and kill all the adds between the spawn timers. The more that's alive in phase 2, the more difficult the DPS race will be. Alright, that's phase 1. Let's talk about phase 2, Entropius. Unlike phase 1, phase 2 is actually fairly simple with just a few abilities. First, his negative energy becomes a chain lightning type attack that jumps to 2 additional targets, dealing reduced damage on each jump. This averages out to about 1400 damage per person that's hit. The number of targets it hits increases every 10 to 15 seconds and acts as a soften rage for this fight. Eventually, you'll be too overcome with raid damage for your healers to keep up, and you'll wipe. Also in phase 2, darkness is no longer a large void zone around the boss, but instead smaller individual void zones that spawn at player locations. These will still spawn a Dark Fiend that needs a dispel or a purge before contacting a player. And finally, Singularity, which will spawn over a random player. This creates a black hole type thing that will pull players nearby in and toss them in the air for the duration. This will also deal about 500 damage per tick to any player that is stuck within. Alright, upon transitioning into phase 2, as Entropius is spawning, the raid should loosely spread with their groups so that AoE healing is still effective, but limiting the number of players that can get hit by any single Singularity cast. The tank should start the boss in the middle of the room and adjust as needed based on Singularity locations and darkness spawns. This phase is an all-out race for healing and damage to kill the boss before raid damage is too great. We've set aside all of our lusts here in order to help with the burn. Remember to pop health stones, any shadow protection potions you have, whatever you can do to burn the boss, stay alive, and finish the fight. Alright, let's talk about some tank stuff. All the adds in phase 1 hit really hard in their own right, so be sure to wear appropriate gear. Be vocal for AoE threat so that DPS knows when they can start cleaving the humanoid adds. And prioritize getting aggro on the melee adds first, then the casters since they can be interrupted to reduce damage. You can assign stuns to the Shadow Sword Berserkers, which can cut down on their damage considerably, especially during their flurry. And for the Void Sentinels, remember their Void Blast hurts really hard, but it can be grounded, so assign a Shaman to it so that you can mitigate some of that damage. It was often the reason our tanks died in our first set of pulls. Alright, and some healer stuff. First, during phase 1, tank heals need to be on point, as tank damage can spike very quickly. The raid should be grouped well so that chain heal casts off the tank will still be effective as raid heals. And be prepared for heavy raid damage if the void spawns get too close to the group. Phase 2 transitions to mostly raid healing and trying to keep the raid healthy long enough to kill the boss. And healers should try to spread throughout the room in Phase 2 to prevent multiple healers being in the same singularity. And don't forget, threat as the ads spawn can be very sensitive. As they run in, your tanks aren't on them and you're still building threat. So try to throttle during those windows so that they have a better chance of picking them up and you not getting one shot. Alright, and some DPS tips. First, Phase 1 DPS assignments should be adhered to at all times to ensure ads die before new sets spawn and that a clean transition can be made into Phase 2. Phase 1 is not a race and it's more about control. Ranged kicks will be needed at times for the Far Fury Mage, and melee should handle the kicks on any within range. And make sure that potion and trinkets will be available when moving into Phase 2 for the burn phase. Alright, well that's Muru. Once he's dead, you're rewarded with 4 of Sunwell Plateau's juiciest items and a nearly trash-free hallway to the final encounter, Kill Jaden. I'll be releasing that guide soon, so make sure to subscribe to find that in your feed. Good luck on Muru, thanks so much for watching, and see you in the next one.